Hi, just covering here this hoo-ha about Jeremy Corbyn and Labour MP Dame Margaret Hodge, who is also Jewish, apparently. So she tells leader he does not want people like me in the party amid fury at new code of conduct, and she called Jeremy Corbyn an effing racist and anti-Semite. Okay. So all of this uproar that's driven Dame Margaret Hodge to using abusive language that people like myself get judged and denigrated for in relation to our dire concerns about child rights to justice and safety in Britain. Okay, but it's understandable. It's understandable that she's reduced to such language in the face of the Labour Party under leadership of Jeremy Corbyn has now decided to establish its own criteria for what could be construed as anti-Semitic. So, she's reported to have told Jeremy Corbyn, "You're a effing anti-Semite and racist. You have proved you don't want people like me in the party." To which Jeremy Corbyn is said to have replied, "I'm sorry you feel like that." And here we've got, the lawfully suspect Keir Starmer fully supporting Dame Margaret Hodge, okay. And, we cannot forget that this is the man who introduced the credibility clause into child protection directives for Britain, so that no matter how believable children's crime reports may appear, how genuine, basically, police just need to focus on whether or not the allegations are credible. So, do they involve paedophiles wearing masks and long black robes engaged in sadistic activities against children? In that case, it's incredible. This is what he has facilitated in Britain under the previous Labour government, alleged Labour government. We know, covert Tory, and he is a covert Tory, and so are a lot of people who were involved in the Labour Party, most particularly those who support Zionist Israel. So, quite rightly, and I must say, I am impressed by Jeremy Corbyn here. I have previously called him Mr. Wishy-Washy. Well, I'm pleased to be proven wrong, because he is making a stance here, and it's a very important stance. So this tirade from Dame Margaret comes after Labour's National Executive Committee, NEC, signed off on a contentious code of conduct that only partly adopts the internationally recognised International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism. So, basically any criticism of Israel's atrocities against the people of Palestine, that can be construed as anti-Semitic. Any criticism of Zionists is judged anti-Semitic, despite the fact that true Jews themselves are rightfully claiming that the Zionist alleged philosophy / demonology is actually itself anti-Semitic and fundamentally operates against the Judaic people of Judaic faith in Yahweh. And as a result of Labour's decision, Jeremy Corbyn's decision, not to uphold a definition of anti-Semitism that would then allow for the oppression and prosecution of people who are rightfully speaking out against the Zionist Israeli government's atrocities and denial of human rights for the people of Palestine. A government that puts its own people at risk by liberally using depleted uranium in areas of Palestine like Gaza. You know, there will be no Passover for depleted uranium dust that causes severe birth defects, stillbirths and miscarriages. And that has a half-life of, 500 billion years? A government that has far outstepped the original borders that were granted to them, and that has reduced Palestine to a series of isolated concentration camps surrounded by Israeli military checkpoints. And naturally, many people are disgusted. And yes, they are holding Israel, comparing Israel policies to those of the Nazis. Because how are they any different? They're racist, and they have placed Palestinian people into concentration camps, and they have stolen their lands. So apparently Jewish community groups in Britain have organised to protest. Okay? But rightfully, the Labour Party is asking, who are British Jews truly supporting them? You know, they're British, they're born in Britain. So, as Zionist Israel supporters, who are they with? In the event of conflict and hostility between Britain and Israel, who will Britain's Jews be supporting? Israel or Britain? Well, if they're that supportive of Israel, of Zionist Israel, then leave Britain and go and live in Israel. Because Britain is a nation that upholds human rights. Okay? Presently, despite the fact that this present tyrannical government wishes to scrap them. And so it is very concerning that we have this organised group of people in Britain who have deep inroads into British Parliament via the Zionist Israel lobby, and actually have greater powers of influence over British politicians than the British voting public. So who are those politicians serving? A foreign, hostile power that is hostile to Britain's protocols on human rights. This is, it's really treasonous that Britain's Parliament tolerates the Israel lobby. We cannot forget that they prohibited British charities from being able to lobby Parliament. So why is this foreign power, this brutal foreign power that calls for the murder of the mothers of Palestinian children, of Palestinians, in order to stop them from breeding more, quote, little snakes? Okay, this is what the Zionist Israeli government ministers describe Palestinian children as little snakes, and actively speak to call for the murder of Palestinian women to stop them from breeding little snakes. What kind of British Parliament, what kind of civilised society could support such rhetoric and such a government that stands by and even strives to satisfy such rhetoric regularly, as we have witnessed time and time again over the course of the half a century and more that the Zionists had taken a foothold in the lands of Palestine. So, you know, we've got all these rabbis and they're saying, yeah, you know, the Jewish community, we support IHRA. Well, I'm sorry, that's hearsay, because actually there's never been a vote, has there? We've got no actual evidence that every single Jew in Britain or the world supports the present IHRA definitions of what anti-Semitism is. And I'm sorry, the Holocaust, it was a terrible thing, but it does not give anybody the right to then commit atrocities and acts of genocide against innocent human beings on the ground that they're a Palestinian. And everybody has a right to ask questions when innocent people's lawful and human rights are being ignored and those people are being robbed and persecuted and their children are being killed and incarcerated. Asking questions about that, voicing concern and criticisms, is not being anti-Semitic. So apparently, you know, another MP, Ian Austin, said the decision was utterly shameful and made him ashamed to be a member of the Labour Party. Well, get out of the Labour Party. Because obviously, under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, it is no longer a party that supports treasonists, people who actively stand against Britain's principles of upholding human rights. You know, apparently, you know, according to MP Ian Austin, let's be clear, Jeremy Corbyn and members of Labour's NEC who supported this appalling decision clearly do not care about the immense distress and offence that has been caused to British Jewish community. Well, how has it caused offence and distress to Britain's Jewish community? Are Britain's Jewish community full of Zionists? I don't believe they are. And Zionism itself really cannot be described as Jewish. It's a creation of, you know, the early 20th century. It's got absolutely nothing to do really with the true Judaism as reflected by Jesus in terms of understanding and appreciating the true light and intelligence and love of Yahweh. It's about superiority. It claims that Jews are God's chosen people and that they are superior to every other race of people on earth, and that all non-Jews are actually not human. They're cattle. Okay. How is that? How has that got anything to do with Judaism? So, you know, the Jewish labour movement, meanwhile, claimed Labour had acted in a deliberate and offensive, reckless manner in believing it understands the needs of a minority community better than the community itself. Well, I'm sorry, what? Your needs depend on crimes and atrocities against the people of Palestine and theft of their lawful lands. So this IHRA definition does need to be questioned. And I'm sorry, Zionists, you will face criticism for your actions, and you will not hide behind the anti-Semitism allegation in order to avoid facing justice. So, you know, here we have Trump threatening Iran now. And, you know, he actually tweets. He tweets this message to the Iranian president. You know, this is how crass he is. He has absolutely, well, he's made America a mockery. He's made America a mockery to the global public. That, you know, he's issuing threats to President Rouhani, basically threatening nuclear war, isn't it? Because what else could he be threatening? With this statement that, you know, never ever again threaten the United States or you will suffer consequences the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. Demented words of violence and death. This is demented words of violence and death from an actually lawfully suspected criminal president, Donald J. Trump. And it begs the question as to how it was possible for a lawful criminal suspect to actually even stand for president. Because, you know, we're told, oh, all these allegations of sexual offences from various women and the young teenage girls at a beauty pageant, oh, they're all fake news. They're all lying. Every single one of these women are lying. Well, I'm sorry, Trump supporters. Mr. Trump's self-confessed, his self-confession, in which he admits to multiple sexual assaults against women and young girls at a beauty pageant that he intruded on in their dressing room while they were, the majority of them, naked and changing into their swimsuits. That's not fake news. Okay? This isn't fake news, this threat to Iran. And this was after Iran had called for peace. So, who is issuing demented words of violence and death? Well, we've heard these demented words of violence and death before, haven't we, in relation to his threats against North Korea. Except, unlike Iran, North Korea does have a nuclear capability. So, you know, he was forced to go and have a little chat, wasn't he? And get pally-pally with the North Korean leader. But it's a known fact that Iran hasn't got any nuclear weapons, and so he can threaten them with nuclear war, can't he? Because, you know, the few throughout history that have suffered the consequences, okay, then who are they? The Japanese people who suffered instant incineration, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of them, via two atomic bombs that were dropped on them as an experiment by the American military. And that was after Japan had attempted to surrender. You know, and we know that now from the evidence that has more recently come to light. So, we've got this criminal. And it does make you wonder, you know, what's happened to the American Constitution. As I say, he's made a mockery. This criminal mob that is now in the White House has made a mockery of America, of the American Constitution. Because, you know, it isn't enough to remove Donald Trump from office. His whole administration has to go. Because no sane person no person of true care and conscience as a true Christian in America could have stood by this man, who is so crass that, you know, he issues international messages to other leaders through Twitter. And then we have the added fact that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a mass murderer and a thief, okay, he's bragging here. I'll leave you the links to these videos. He's bragging here about the amount of influence and power he has over President Trump, that it was him that persuaded Trump to abandon the Iran nuclear deal. Why? Why has the Iran nuclear deal been abandoned? Why has he persuaded America to engage in hostilities with Iran? Iran apparently has been engaged in trying to defeat ISIS, who apparently America and Britain have been waging a war against terror on. And that's a very serious matter when we consider that Zionist Israel, again, has more power and control over American politics and American politicians than the people of America. A consciousness that runs the global banks, that funds things like private corporate militaries. You know, this really is tantamount to treason, because the American media have been busy focusing on, you know, Russian influence into American affairs. Well, perhaps they ought to start focusing on Zionist influence into American affairs. You know, this is a rogue nation. It's an open secret that they have nuclear weapons and very probably other weapons of mass destruction. Have they faced weapons inspectors? Have they been through faced any sanctions? Oh no, because to criticise them is to be anti-Semitic. They're all abiding by the IHRA definition of what it means to be anti-Semitic. You can't criticise Israel. You can't criticise Zionist atrocities. You're being anti-Semitic. And in spite of the fact that the Zionists themselves are anti-Semitic. And it's a well-known fact, isn't it? Among the Tommy Robinson supporters and Trump supporters of this world. You know, the ones that gathered in Charlottesville chanting, Jews will not replace us. Okay? All supporting Mr. Trump, who is a self-confessed Zionist. The same in Britain. We've got marches, people with swastikas, doing Nazi salutes, supporting Tommy Robinson, who is himself a self-confessed Zionist. I am a Zionist, it read on a big badge on his jacket. So obviously, the far-right extremist Nazi-type consciousness of this world is fully aware that Zionists are anti-Semitic, and that's why they support. That's why they support them. That's why they are supporting Donald Trump. And so Jewish people need to understand about who is really their enemy here. Because the people criticising Zionism and expressing deep concerns about Zionist atrocities are actually the friend of every true Jew. And many Jews in this world who are never given a voice by media like The Independent, or we are fully aware, Zionist-controlled medias, they do not give a voice to the many millions of Jews who are disgusted about what is going on in Israel in their name. And they're fully aware that Zionists have usurped their faith, and precisely to stamp out the light of Yahweh, the true love of Yahweh. Because we're talking about criminals here, and their true God is Lucifer. They support the Luciferian cult that, according to people like Mr. Renard Bernard, are a strong influence in global finance. So, you know, these are very, very important points. And it is high time that this world woke up to reality. And we stopped beating about the bush here. Because we cannot tolerate these crimes against humanity, the disgusting hypocrisy that allows a nation like Israel to own weapons of mass destruction, and yet they have not signed any of the treaties that are lawfully required in order for a country to be trusted to hold such weapons. They have never faced weapons inspections. To even talk about placing sanctions against Israel for its crimes against humanity is to be anti-Semitic. Apparently. And yet this country has insisted on weapons inspectors going into Iran, into Iraq. It's now insisted that America issue sanctions against Israel, which, you know, that is what is happening here. Here he is, you know, on behalf of Trump with his gold-fringed corporate flag there behind him. He's talking about sanctions against Iran to prohibit the sale of Iran's oil. That will deeply affect the Iranian economy and therefore impact very heavily on Iran's citizens and put children at risk. Because, let's face it, children are always the first to suffer when people are living in dire austerity. And they've done the same to Venezuela as a punishment because the people there have voted for a non-corporate government. You know, this is war. This is war against humanity. That is what is going on. This is war against humanity. Sorry about that interruption. So, as I say, these sanctions that they want to issue against Iran. But it's okay for people to be anti-Muslim. It's okay for people to speak out against Christianity. It's not okay for people to speak out against Zionism. And the fact is, Zionism is anti-Semitic. That's the fact of it. And why no sanctions against Israel? Why no weapons inspectors? Because without those inspections and without any signing of treaties that permit nations to hold, i.e. nuclear weapons, then Israel is a rogue nation and it is a threat to every nation in the Middle East and in Europe. And even in America, in fact, any nation where they have a foothold, a stranglehold, through their finance and their Zionist lobbies into the politics of those nations, such as the Senate, Congress. You know, they've actually created a situation so every member of Congress has to swear an allegiance to Israel. Otherwise, as Cynthia McKinney explains, all your funding's suddenly cut and suddenly, you know, you're out of office. We are talking high treason here. This is high treason for any nation that upholds human rights, that is allegedly civilised, for them to be supporting a tyrannical power that actively ignores human rights and operates on the strength of a racist, eugenist, Nazi-style philosophy of racial supremacy. That's treason. Because it fundamentally opposes the American Constitution. It fundamentally opposes of everything that a nation like Britain had established itself to be after World War II. And it is a force of consciousness that is continually abusing its powers of finance and military weapons in order to control and manipulate what is happening in countries like Britain. So, hats off to Jeremy Corbyn. I will no longer refer to you as Mr. Wishy-Washy. I take it back. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for standing up for sense, sanity and human compassion. And I hope that the citizens of Britain take heed and follow suit.